I think that, in comparing the way that we look at things to the way in which the Americans look at things, there is a natural clarity to their setup because they're in charge. You know, if you're a subordinate part of this whole thing, you are always working within an American framework, and therefore that complicates the way in which you have to operate. I think that there is an inherent and an enduring tension between guaranteeing the collective outcome, which can only be achieved by getting the best out of the coalition, and also reserving a national position, and that sometimes requires reference to capitals.
From General Fry, there was also a tantalising glimpse into the shadowy role played by British special forces in Iraq.
I think that the defeat of al-Qaeda is, as yet, it's an unrecorded story, and I think that the role of British, particularly British special forces in that was of an absolutely historic scale. Once it was clear that al-Qaeda in Iraq could be defeated, then the Sunni extremist elements no longer saw it in their interest to continue to be associated with a part of an insurgency which al-Qaeda had created. They then became far more susceptible to an accommodation with government, and once that started to happen, then the whole emphasis of the internal political process could be turned on to the containment of the Shia.
But the central question for those in Whitehall was what more the coalition could have done to prepare for the phase after the invasion.
Very few observers actually highlighted the scale of the violence that we could face. I think about the only person in my recollection who got it right was President Mubarak, who warned of unleashing 100 bin Ladens. The combination of an undefeated Ba'athist regime melting away and coming back as a gradually more potent insurgency, combined with the attractiveness of Iraq as a means for international terrorists under the umbrella of al-Qaeda having a go at the Americans, combined with Shia extremists supported from Iran. This combination creating the level of violence, the onslaught of violence that I've mentioned, that was not thought through by any observer. I think had we, frankly, had we known the scale of violence, it might well have led to second thoughts about the entire project. And we could certainly have mitigated some aspects of it had we had a clearer appreciation of it in advance.
As the inquiry has become more focused, Whitehall officials are having to respond to key criticisms raised in earlier evidence.
Do you think, from your own experience of arriving in this job with no background in the region, not having been to Iraq, a bit of time for meeting people, but not much more than that, is one lesson to be learnt from that it would have been useful? Did you feel it would have been useful to have had more grounding in the subject before you took it over?
I'm sure it would have been more useful, and I think all of us who started jobs in the summer of that year, were conscious that we were, arriving after the train had left the station and with an unfolding drama, which was intensifying in Iraq itself. But I applied myself to the job pretty diligently.
Now, as you look back on it, do you think that Iraq was worth the very high cost, especially in lives lost and people seriously injured?
That's a very difficult decision and a very difficult debate, and I can't answer that even now. I know that at the time it did require a high degree of resilience and energy on the part of everyone concerned, but it was a hugely important issue for our government for the reason I gave at the beginning, that ministers realised that our reputation internationally in everything we did would suffer if we weren't able to see some measure of success in Iraq.
So what has it done for our reputation in the world? Has it been a plus or a minus?
I'd answer it in the same way as other people have answered that question to you. I think it depends who you're talking to and whether you're talking publicly or privately.
The last public hearing before the Christmas break was all about Iraq's reconstruction and development. But it was also a chance for the chairman, Sir John Chilcot, to reflect on the way the inquiry is going and the approach that his committee has been taking.
In the hearings so far, a huge amount of valuable and illuminating evidence has been uncovered. And that's why we approached the opening phase of hearings in the way we did. We have not been trying to ambush witnesses or score points. This is a serious inquiry, and we are not here to provide public sport or entertainment. The whole point of our approach has been to get to the facts. We have been asking fair questions and have been expecting and getting full and truthful answers. That is the essence of a formal public inquiry, and witnesses have responded to this approach by being commendably open and candid, highlighting a number of issues which we shall examine much more closely as the inquiry continues. Taken together, this is an exceptional level of openness, and my colleagues and I remain committed to hearing as much of the evidence in public as possible. Evidence will only be heard in private in the narrow circumstances we have set out in the published protocols on our website. But I would like to be absolutely clear about this. Evidence sessions with key decision makers, including the former Prime Minister, will be in public. They will be openly questioned about the big issues that they were involved in.
So the public hearings have been suspended until the new year. But Friday was an opportunity for the members of the Iraq inquiry to meet the families of those killed in Iraq during the conflict from 2003 onwards. The families are watching this process more closely than most.
The lines of inquiry we have pursued in the hearings, and will continue to do in the further hearings in the new year, have already been shaped in part by what we've heard from other families over the past 2 months, and will be shaped by what we hear from you today.
In spite of the warm welcome, the families still bear the pain of loss. Their anger is fueled by what they say was an illegal war.
It is the weapons of mass destruction that this centres upon. I believe that Blair used this as a way in. He couldn't do it with regime change because that would not have been allowed. So he used the weapons and the threat upon the country that rockets could be fired from Iraq that could damage British sovereign countries or even Britain, which we now know is a load of rubbish.
How come a Prime Minister can mislead Parliament and mislead the nation and cajole this country into a war it really didn't want or could afford? Secondly, we look at the point of what happened with the deaths of our loved ones, the circumstances surrounding the death. And I understand maybe not everybody has yet had their inquests, but a lot of the cases did involve a direct link to equipment failure, not having equipment. And I think that really needs to be looked at in detail, because there has been misleading evidence given already about equipment levels, an issue of equipment and availability of equipment. And I do have documents in my case here to back this up. So we have the legality of the war, the misleading into war. We have the issues surrounding the deaths of our loved ones. 179, 180 people lost their lives here, thousands wounded. But we have to remember Iraq will be watching this inquiry. Reports up to 100,000 innocent Iraqis have died. And when we actually think what happened here, American and British warplanes flew over Baghdad, dropped weaponry, bombs which exploded, and whether you detonate from a plane or plant a bomb on the ground and detonate it, it's going to indiscriminately kill. Hundreds, perhaps many innocent people died that night of shock and awe. And surely there has to be accountability somewhere for those actions. We were led to believe this was a just cause, and I think it's becoming abundantly clear now from the evidence already given it was not a just cause.
Thank you, Mr. Keys.
The Iraq inquiry has now been suspended until early in the new year. That's when we'll hear from the key decision makers, the politicians, among them Tony Blair.